good to see everyone here this morning. It's good to be back. We've been on a week-long vacation or week-long break. Some of you have been on a break also. It's good to have you back with us today. We're in the midst of a series pertaining to what we call ancient ethics in a modern world. And before I begin, I want you just to look at the picture here. That is an offering to the god, the false god Molech, which really depicts the scenes that takes place in 2 Kings chapter 23. You'll notice that the false god is a god that is made of metal or brass. You can't tell that from the black and white picture, but you do see men putting fire in the backside of that. That is a big hollow image in which they build fires within it. Then you have the men on the front of it beating the drums, making a lot of noise with instruments to drown out the cries of the child that will be placed on the fiery image, on the arms of that image, as they kill that child. That's a picture of what takes place in such scenes as 2 Kings chapter 23. Actually, 2 Kings 23 tells us that Josiah tore down the altars at Tophet and Hinnom, and these gods, or these images to the false god Molech, in which his grandfather Manasseh had offered actually children on the arms of that altar. Such had been the degraded practice, almost unimaginable, really unimaginable practice of the people of Israel at that time. How could a people, the people of Israel that had been brought out of captivity and ordered and instructed by God, how could they have degraded themselves to a subhuman point in which they're actually offering live children as sacrificial offerings to a false god? How could that possibly be? How could it be that a people can lose their sensibilities and their minds, any moral sensitivity to any such atrocity as we're seeing depicted on this picture here? One of the historians in a classic work tells us here's basically how it took place. This is from a Jewish historian according to Jewish tradition. From what source we know not, the image of Molech was of brass, hollow within, situated without Jerusalem. Kimchi, that would be a Jewish scholar, on 2 Kings 23 and 10, describes it as set within 7 chapels. And whoso offered fine flour, they opened to him one of those chapels. And whoso offered turtle doves or young pigeons, they opened to him 2. If you offered a lamb, they opened to you the 3rd chapel. A ram, they opened to him 4. A calf, they opened to him 5. An ox, they opened to him 6. And whoever offered his son, offered a live child sacrifice, they opened to him the 7th. And his fall, that would be the image, was that of a calf. That is Molech. His hands stretched forth like a man who opens his hands to receive something of his neighbor. And they kindled it with fire. That is, they built the fire within the animal or within this image. And the priest took the babe and put it on the hands of Molech. And the babe gave up the ghost. And why was it called Tophet and Hinnom? Because they used to make noise with drums to him, that the father might not hear the cry of his child and have pity upon him and return to him. Hinnom then, because the babe wailed, Menachem, and the noise of the wailing went up. That is from McClintock and Strong's classic work, Encyclopedia of Biblical Knowledge. We ask again, what kind of people could have degraded their own sensitivities to such a subhuman level as that? The answer is, we would. We would in America. I want us to note 3 things this morning, and then we'll come back to how it answers the question. We would in America. Number 1, we'll note what the Bible teaches regarding a child. The child in the mother's womb. Number 2, I want to say a few words about when life begins. What does the Bible say? What does science say? And then number 3, what really is infanticide or abortion. Let's notice this grand passage in the Bible, and I call your attention to it in Psalms 139. Here's a translation that was given by Hugo McCord, who was a great a biblical scholar and a teacher and instructor at Oklahoma Christian for many years, and it differs in some of the words from the English Standard, which I have in my hands. And I want you to note the different words that are utilized. This is the passage that was read in your hearing a few moments ago by Jacob. For you formed me, or you formed me in my inward parts. Note the wording here is the organs. The word inward parts is a reference to that which is inside of a child. The inward parts, the organs inside my body. Speaking to God, you formed me and the organs inside of me. And you knitted me together in my mother's womb. God had a hand on the child. I am, David said, fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. That I know so well. My bodily form was not hidden from you. The word bodily form is used or is translated in the English Standard as my frame. That would be the bones and the skeleton. My frame, my bodily form was known. So my frame or my bodily form was not hidden from you, being made in the privately in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw me as an embryo. I want you to notice the word embryo here is the idea that we have a substance formed my unformed substance, but the word literally is God forms the embryo, that's the word unformed substance, in the mother's womb, or as he puts it, in a parallelism, in the depths of the earth. That's the darkness of the womb. And in your body, all its parts were, or in your book rather, all its parts were written. And even the time ordained for me before day one. Day one would be the day of birth. So David tells us in a beautiful passage that God had his hand on him when he was an embryo in his mother's womb. That God knitted him together, his organs, all of his workings, his code, the DNA code, which we'll talk about in a moment, his bodily form, his skeletal substance, all of the operations of the body, God knitted them together. And the idea of is of an artisan. God is an artisan working the child even as an embryo in the mother's womb. Isn't that a beautiful picture of a babe? What is the phrase, in the depths of the earth? You'll notice the phrase is right here in the midst of it, being made privately in the depths of the earth. Some people ask, what are the depths of the earth? You'll notice that in Hebrew poetry we have parallelism. And I call your attention to the very top of it. You created my organs inside of me. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. Parallel with that is my bodily form was not hidden from you, being privately made in the depths of the earth. Privately made in the depths of the earth refers to the inner recesses of the womb. It is simply a poetic description, as Hebrew scholars show us, because, number one, the phrases are synonymous. In my mother's womb, in the depths of the earth, one in the same place. As one scholar tells us, Leslie says, it refers to the remotest recesses of the mother's womb. Or it's a poetical description, says Cohen, of the darkness of a mother's womb, the inky blackness that is there. And so it's a poetical description of inside the mother's body as the babe is being developed by God. Then he says all of the parts were written. Did you notice that phrase? All of the parts were written. What is the writing of it? And how is it, by the way, that David, so many centuries even before Christ, pointed out that all of my parts, all of my body was written while it was in the womb? What does it mean, written? We know today the DNA code, or know of the DNA code. It determines not only the gender, the skin pigment, the eye color, the hair color, the body size, the fingerprints of the baby is all predetermined by that DNA code that is done in the DNA or done in the womb. Note this reference to the DNA. It has or is composed of 64 compound chemicals. It is coordinated to serve the skeletal, muscular, nervous, respiratory, digestive, circulatory, reproductive. Every function of a body is predetermined by that DNA code. And so, even while that babe is just an embryo, in every single cell of that body, that DNA code is written beforehand. We have, for example, the skeletal function of the body, 230 moving parts, already as an embryo in the mother's womb. And isn't it interesting that the word embryo, these inward parts, is utilized by David, referring to what was in the mother's womb? David Hume was a philosopher and a skeptic. And he was about 2.5 centuries ago. David Hume did not believe in God, but when he considered the human body and he considered the baby in a mother's womb, he came to the point where he was really on the edge of belief. And here's what his statement is, one of them. The skin, ligaments, and the vessels, the 600 muscles of the body, each, what's the word next? Intelligently placed and adjusted for above 6,000 intentions. Who can doubt, said Hume, of supernatural super intelligence? Who can doubt it when you consider the functioning of a body and even of a babe, an embryo in a mother's womb? So said David Hume. Unfortunately, Hume relapsed once again, after such grand considerations as these, into skepticism and became one of the world's most infamous skeptics and atheistic persons who argued for atheism in all of the history. And so they still teach David Hume in philosophy classes. Consider the embryo. After only 3 months, the hands and feet are so fashioned they can play an organ. Remarkable, isn't it? They can paint a picture. That is the hands. Isn't that absolutely astonishing? 3-month-old child in the womb has already the fashion and already the capability, simply lacking the coordination, to play an organ. How about the circulatory system? After 3 weeks, the heart is already beating 100,000 times a day it beats. It pumps 5 quarts of blood a minute, 75 gallons an hour, 70 barrels a day, and 18 million barrels in 70 years. Such is the heart of a beating heart in a baby 3 months old. How about the hearing? The hearing, the inner, middle, and outer ear are formed at 3 months. It has a keyboard already capable of discerning 1,500 different keys of sound. Compare that to the piano, a man-made instrument that has only 58. Isn't that remarkable? Beyond imagination. How about the eye? Considering the eye, many a skeptic has come to the body, the human body, and said, how can the eye be explained outside of divine intelligence? How can it be? Simply cannot. The eye is of no use at the time it was formed. It is an optical instrument made in the dungeon, said Paley in his Natural Theology. That was a long time, several hundred years ago. Paley wrote Natural Theology. I want you to note what he had to say regarding the eye. He noted the fact that the eye is formed in a dungeon. What does that mean? What significance has that? That is, the eye, all of the parts of the eye, listed here on the bottom are the major portions. They have optical nerves, retina, lens, pupil, iris, the cornea. All of these things are already in place, but not able to function without what? Light. And yet it is formed perfectly capable of being able to be an optic nerve or an optic instrument when the light hits it. And it is formed in inky blackness. Who can doubt superhuman intelligence in the eye? David Hume said, thinking about the eye, he said, anatomize the eye, survey its structure and contrivance, and tell me from your own feeling if the idea of a contriver, that would be who? God. He's speaking about God, does not immediately flow in upon you with a force like that of sensation. You just look at the eye, and you just have the idea that surely God created the eye. How could he be explained on any other basis? The most obvious conclusion surely is in favor of design. So said a non-believer in God. You cannot even consider the intricate parts of a human embryo without God. Human life is unique. According to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26, man was created in the image of God, and because of that image of God, murder is therefore wrong. Genesis chapter 9 and verse 6. Simply because the image of God is upon humankind. So murder is always wrong. And I put up here a couple of passages regarding death. Not all killing is classified as murder. There is civic responsibility, according to Romans chapter 13, for exterminating life when life has been taken purposely. Furthermore, there is a difference between purposeful taking of life and accidental life. And furthermore, the Old Testament makes distinction between life that is taken in war and one that is taken in premeditated murder. But the point is that human life has value, and because of that value, murder has always been wrong. In every society, murder has always been wrong. Now, people have killed for different reasons in different societies, but they've all recognized that human life has some kind of value that is more than an animal, more than the animate creation, because life has this image of God. That brings us to this question. When then does life begin? Number 2 question, when does life begin? I want us to notice 2 things very quickly. Number 1, the Bible, and then number 2, science. We don't want to spend much time here because, frankly, science is so clear, so evident, the evidence is so monumental that it really is belaboring the point to mention it. But I want to mention just a couple of ideas. Number 1, the Bible. The Bible shows us very distinctly and clearly that life begins at the moment of conception. How do we know that? Not only the passage that we just examined from David's inspired pen, Psalms 139, where God knitted this embryo together in the womb. God's hand was upon it. But also we have the very words child, which is translated babe, is utilized for a child in the womb. Luke 1 and 41, where we have John leaps in Elizabeth's womb, and the word there is brephos, child. The same word is used for a babe that has already been born. Brephos, child. And so Luke chapter 2, verses 12 and verse 16 uses the same word for a young child, baby. So also children will struggle within her. That would be a reference to Rebekah, Genesis chapter 25, verses 21 and 22. Notice in her womb she had 2 children, and the word that is utilized in the Hebrew text is children, and they struggled within her. They were not simply blobs of tissue. They were not simply fetuses. They were children in her womb. That's how the Bible describes unborn babes. So also Elizabeth conceived a son. Luke chapter 1, verse 36. She conceived at conception, it was, John, a son. Same word utilized throughout the Bible and even in today's terminology to refer to a descendant, a son. So also brephos is used of a small child that is brought to Christ in Luke chapter 18, verse 15. Brephos, remember, that was the babe that not only brought to Christ that our Lord might bless it, the little children, but also it is utilized of an unborn baby in a mother's womb. The same word. The Bible simply makes no distinction between life outside the womb and life within the womb. It is all the same. It is all human life. It is all impacted with the stamp of God, made in God's image. Very plain. The Bible speaks abundantly clear on this particular point. What does science say? Science says exactly the same. It tells us precisely in same terminology almost exactly what we have. This is from 1981. These are statements made by scientists in congressional hearings in that year. Listen carefully what they said. In biology and in medicine, it is an accepted fact that the life of an individual organism reproducing by sexual reproduction begins at conception or fertilization. It's an accepted fact of biology and medicine. We understand that. Very plain, very simple. Here's another one. Dr. Gordon says, but now we can say unequivocally that the question of when life begins is no longer a question for theological or philosophical dispute. The Bible has been right all along, is what he's about to say. It is an established scientific fact, just like gravity, just like the second law of thermodynamics, just like the speed of light. All of these things are established scientific facts. It's an established scientific fact that life begins, he says, at conception. Philosophers may go on to debate the meaning of life or the purpose of life, but it is an established fact that all life, including human life, begins at the moment of conception. That is human life, conception. The sperm and egg unite, and there we have human life, conception. But our society in which we live has now taken a route that has been less traveled in ancient societies, but it has always ended up in captivity and destruction of the society on this point alone. And I want you to notice it. What we call abortion is actually infanticide. And we will see how that works in just a moment. Ronald Reagan made this statement. I thought this was such a grand statement. He has there are 2 slides here regarding Reagan. The real issue today is not when human life begins. It's so settled, so clear, so evident. That's not even the issue. The issue is, what is the value of human life? That is the issue, and you'll see that he was almost prophetic in that statement. What is the value of human life? The abortionist who reassembles the arms and legs of a tiny baby to make sure all of its parts have been torn from the mother's womb or body can hardly doubt whether it is a human being. Next statement that he makes, every legislator, every doctor, every citizen needs to recognize the real issue is whether to affirm and protect the sanctity of all human life or to embrace a social ethic where some human lives are valued and others are not. That's where we are in our society. It is with much grievous feelings and sadness that we all recognize the fact that our society has incorporated infanticide as far as public practice, as far as the Democratic Party is concerned. It is a part and parcel of the Democratic platform. Abortion at any particular point in the child's life, from the time of conception unto the time of 9 months old, you might abort that, kill that child. Infanticide. That has been something going on in America. But not only so, we now have a government that tells us, you're going to pay for it. You may not like it, you may preach against it, they may do it over there, but not only so, we're taking your money and you're going to fund what is taking place in those hospitals. You're paying for it. That's what's going on. And it has been an issue that we have not paid as close attention to as we should have. What is going on now in the Roman Church, with President Obama forcing the Roman Church to pay for contraception, which they religiously oppose, and everybody's up in arms about it? It has been going on for a long time. He has been, they have been, the government has been making you fund infanticide for a long time. And let me tell you, in my estimation, that is much worse than simply funding a contraception concept. We have been paying for infanticide. Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Just the other day, 2 philosophers came out in a journal of medical ethics. They're medical philosophers. This is an online journal. You can go and read it. It was last month. And these philosophers, both in Australia by the name of Gio Bellini and Minerva, both of them, one from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, the other one a Center for Applied Philosophy, they advocated publicly, and it has now been spread around the world, that we might kill a child after it has been born, and they call it after-birth abortion. Because there is no difference, say they, in the child out of the womb and in the womb. No difference. And in that, they're right. They're exactly right. They're simply applying by consistency what we've done in abortion. That's all they're doing. By the way, do you remember the partial birth abortion controversy several years ago that President Clinton was so supportive of? What is partial birth abortion? They actually bring the baby's head out of the mother's womb. They slit the back of the skull and suck the brains out with a vacuum cleaner. That's how it is done. That's why they call it partial birth abortion. And we had a president that many people in America, naming themselves as Christians, said, we like him because he will do good for the economy. Well, the economy may go to the hot place in a handbasket, but if our morality doesn't get in line with itself and Christians start standing for some kind of principled people, we're going to lose our country, and we should. And the same thing is going on right now. These men argue that you can have not partial birth, but all birth. That is, the baby is aborted, or baby actually is born, I should say. And now we can exterminate the life of that child for so long of the life of that child out of the womb, but not because of the health of the mother, not because of something that might be wrong with the baby, not be to save someone's life, you know, those altruistic ideas and concepts and those altruistic motives that we all talk about. Well, how about if the life of the mother's at stake and so forth, like, oh. No, they say, no, what? If it's financially feasible, if it's going to be a financial hardship on the mother, if it's going to be something that they don't want, if it's going to be an inconvenience to them, they argue it boldly on those grounds. That one might, and it might be, and it is, they say, ethically permissible to do this, to kill the child after it has been born. Well, they say the reason is because newborn infants, they're only potential persons. See, we call the child in the womb a fetus because we don't want to face the fact that it is really a human life. So they're going to have to come up with a name like fetus for a few months of the child's life, or the few weeks, that we might kind of harden our hearts to the concept that it's actually a child. So they argue. Here's the statement at length. If criteria such as the costs, social, psychological, economic, for the potential parents are good enough reasons for having an abortion, okay, they can't afford a child. I made a mistake. I can't afford a child. Even when the fetus is healthy, this is their statement. If the moral status of the newborn is the same as that of the infant, and if neither has any moral value by virtue of being a potential person, they're all just potential persons, you see, then the same reasons which justify abortion also justifies the killing of potential persons when it is at the stage of a newborn. It's all just potential personhood. So we have taken the child in the womb and we've called it a fetus because we're really saying that's a potential person. Now they're saying, hey, same application by consistency applies to a newborn after the birth. It's only a potential person. Why? Well, the eyes are not yet focused, and it has not the coordination and the coordinating movements able to take care of itself and so forth. So, when does life begin? When does it begin? Here's how they say it. This is hard to take, isn't it? Giubellini and Minerva say, well, we're not certain. We just don't know. Well, we don't know. That decision will have to be settled by neurologists and psychologists. Oh, there's what we get. Boy, we're going to get some good answers there, aren't we? Let's let the professors at college tell us when life begins. Oh, yeah, they'll be able to tell us well, won't they? Yeah, they're going to be real good on that one. When does life begin? They want neurologists and psychologists to tell us when real human life actually begins. There was a woman, I want to tell you this story, an occurrence that happened about, it was in 2005, I believe the year is, and it was in the state of Illinois. And the woman's name was Jill Stanek. She was a nurse, worked in a hospital in Chicago. And they were performing abortions. They were late term, 9-month-old abortions. They were labor-induced abortions. This particular incident occurred, and Jill tells about it, the nurse Jill tells about it in a congressional hearing in the state of Illinois. And she tells about the child with Down syndrome. The mother did not want the child. So they performed on the 9-month-old baby, an abortion. The baby lived, however. The baby lived outside the womb. So they took the baby and they put it in a soiled utility closet. Now she's telling this in a congressional hearing before senators on a judiciary committee. They put the baby in a soiled utility closet to expire. She said, I could not stand it. She tells the story in tears. I could not stand that. I went into the utility closet and I held the baby until the baby died, 45 minutes later. The state of Illinois was at that moment considering whether to protect the life of an aborted baby that actually lived, or an abortion procedure that had been performed on the mother and the baby, that the baby lived, a 9-month-old full-term baby, even with Down syndrome. The baby lived, and so they were considering whether or not to pass a bill that should protect the life of that child that had been dumped in the utility closet. She said, when I spoke, there was one of the senators there that was unfazed, is her word, by the testimony. He got up later and said, well, if we pass a bill that protects that life of the child of the abortion that is still living, that means that somehow we'll have to consider protecting the life of unborns all throughout the pregnancy, and we cannot do that. And he was, she said, unfazed by the testimony. His name was Barack Obama. He said, no, we're not going to have a law to protect a child that has been dumped in a soiled utility closet. That's the king that we have elected. That is the man who wants you to bow down to him. Here's the man who not only wants to be king, but he wants to be the high priest of Molech as well. He is saying that we are not only going to have it in this country, all 9 months of pregnancy, kill the children, but if they're born alive or if they're aborted alive, we are going to exterminate that child, and we are not going to allow it to live. I ask the question, ladies and gentlemen, will America last? A better question will be this: should America last? Or should America go to captivity? I stand before you simply as one who preaches the gospel, and I say this: we will go to captivity. We will be punished because we have not only put a man in the office who wants to be king, and you know his executive orders are acting as a king, but he wants to be the priest of Molech as well. He wants to himself be the one who practices infanticide, and that is exactly what he practiced. That is by legislation. And he stands up before crowds and talks about it, and yet we have 1/3 to 1/2 of America who seems to appreciate him because he's for the poor man. We are in serious, serious trouble. And if we don't quit thinking about economics and think instead about morality, we are going to lose our freedom. We will be captives in our own land if we're not getting that way right now. And it should not be any other way in the freedom that we have known in America that we would lose that freedom, because we have the priest of Molech who is sitting in the White House now. And it's not simply his fault, it's our fault. We have allowed this to occur. We have allowed individuals to legislate for us who have not stood for the sanctity of human life. And as Ronald Reagan said, the real question is, what is the value of human life to you? What is the value of human life to me? That's the issue. If we don't value human life more than we do, we will be gone in a few years. We may still live here. Just as there were remnants left in the land of Israel, they still lived there. but they were captives in their own land. We will be captives in our own country. Let's, as a congregation, as a church, as Christian people, stand for morality against these ancient ethics that are taking place in a modern world. Let us stand up for what is right and what is good, no matter what the consequences may be. If you're not a Christian, we invite you to respond to the invitation by belief, repentance, baptism into Christ. God puts you into His family. And the great thing about the gospel is He washes away all sin. Regardless of what sin it is, how degraded it was, how horrible it may have been, how subhuman practices we have done in the past may have been, God forgives, forgets. When you become a Christian and you become a new creature, 2 Corinthians 5:17, that is the only redemption individually. That is the only redemption for us nationally. To be faithful to God, to get our nation back to God. Won't you come right now while we stand and sing?